Crescent City Crime contains violent and explicit content that is not suitable for a younger audience. Certain topics may be disturbing or triggering to some listeners. Listen at your own risk. Thank you for supporting the podcast by listening to Crescent City Crime. Please help spread the word of the podcast by telling a friend about us. You may help further support the show by leaving us a 5-star review on your preferred podcasting platform. We are also on Patreon at Crescent City Crime. Check the episode description for source links, as well as links to our social media accounts. The music used in this introduction is called the Black Fingerprint, and it was composed by Dylan Owen. Welcome to Crescent City Crime, dear listeners. I'm Tracy.
And I'm Brian.
Thank you for tuning in and subscribing. We hope that you have your ears on us for a long time. Word of mouth is always helpful, so please make sure that you recommend our podcast to a friend or a loved one or a family member or a random stranger on the street.
Yes, thank you very much for listening. And the more people who listen, the longer we can continue bringing this podcast to you, which is our pleasure.
It really is. And I also want to give a very special thank you to a young woman named Lucy who is helping us out with our social media. We are now on TikTok, Brian.
That's great. That's very good. Been waiting for that.
So have I. Well, she herself has, work and a boyfriend and all that stuff. So, but she is volunteering her time for this. So thank you, Lucy.
Thank you, Lucy.
So last week we talked about the grim past and the not so nice present of the Louisiana State Prison, aka Angola. Thousands of inmates earn just 4 cents to $1 per hour for their labor in the prison, but there is another way that the men of Angola can earn even more money. Have you ever been to the Angola rodeo?
No, I've never been to the rodeo. Although of course, the gift shop in Angola does feature items inspired by the rodeo, especially certain items made of leather.
That's
manufactured in, of course, by inmates in Angola.
Of course. Everything within Angola is manufactured in Angola, though. Like, it really is its own self-sufficient city, essentially.
Yeah, you're talking about commodities, yeah.
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 What I'm saying is they also grow their own food and produce cattle, and they train the horses, too. More than a city, it is a farm. I mean, that's what they call it, the farm. That's the other nickname for Angola. Isn't it? Don't they call it the farm sometimes?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, in the Angola prison rodeo, which takes place twice a year, each Sunday in October and for one weekend in April, spectators can attend the prison rodeo. In this modern-day Roman Colosseum, people can witness prisoners compete in dangerous competitions. The participants risk severe injury to ride bucking horses and outrun angry bulls. Do you want to outrun an angry bull?
No, I certainly don't. And I would not be cut out to be a rodeo clown neither.
Oh, no. Because you have to distract the bull to allow the rider to get away out of danger, right? Isn't that the purpose of rodeo clown?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, the men who participate in these events receive no training.
Wow.
And the stock that is used for these rodeos are not actually fit to be in real rodeos, but they're close to it. So these are still big, tough animals who are, they are dangerous to be around.
Yeah, talk about hard labor.
Very much so. Now, The men who participate in these events, they get no extra pay, but they have a chance to win some prize money. Would you like to hear how they earn the prize money?
Oh, let's hear it.
So I do want to make clear, though, that those who participate, they do wear safety equipment. Helmets, protective vests, and a mouthpiece. So it's almost like football, kind of.
Yeah.
You know. There have been some bumps, bruises, and broken bones, but there have been no life-threatening injuries, at least according to official media outlets. But, well, we all know how corrupt the prison is, so if somebody did actually die from their injuries, I wouldn't be surprised if they had covered it up.
Yeah, especially during the earlier periods of this rodeo where it was much easier to cover such things up.
That's very true. So security is provided by correctional staff and local law enforcement, and medical staff is on standby. So one of the events is called Convict Poker. A bull is released on 4 inmates at a poker table. Whoever manages to stay in their chair for the longest time wins $250.
That is outrageous.
It is.
Now, do you know, is that even based on an actual rodeo event, or is this just some crazy concoction of Angola?
I don't know if it's based off an actual rodeo event, but it feels like this is more of a crazy concoction. Some kind of twisted event where some masochist probably said, "Hey, you know, it'd be a great idea, guys."
Yeah, this sounds like something from a Faces of Death movie. Inmate poker, and the very name.
Yes, the very name
Suggests something very suggests subjugation.
It really does.
Of someone, of people that this institution has power over.
And you only get $250. That's not a whole lot of money to potentially be gored by a bull or trampled or something like that.
I'm sure there are people who get drunk on Bourbon Street who you might be able to talk into a contest like that after they've had at least a couple of, just for example, a couple of hand grenades, drinks, chased by screwdrivers, something like that.
Right.
So, but someone of sound mind and body would obviously look at you like you're a nutcase if you said, "Oh, hey, tell you what, you have a 1 in 4 chance of winning $250, and all you have to do is be the last person sitting when a bull enters the room."
When you put it like that, it does sound nuts.
Yeah, that's totally crazy, and that's
cruel.
That's desperation on the part of those inmates who make 4 cents
to a dollar, 4 cents to $1 an hour,
right? So that they could have this, they could accumulate money for one of two reasons. Like if it's someone who's eventually going to get out, then yeah, they're saving some money for when they're released. But then the other reason, they say someone who's a lifer who, well, may think, "Oh, I got nothing to lose. I could get $250 for my inmate commissary fund." Is you familiar with that commissary fund?
I know what it is. That's what prisoners can use to buy things, I guess, in the prison store, like food and
certain types of food. Or it ends up being mostly snack food that they can't get at the
in the cafeteria.
In the cafeteria, or in some case, you're talking about like the maximum security part of the prison, brought to their cell.
Right.
This, of course, includes ice cream, which, well, the ice cream can get pretty dicey because, of course, the logistics of delivering that to the inmates, it starts melting after a certain period of time.
And not a long period of time either.
Right. So there'll be times when this bags of commissary or inmates spends including this ice cream, spends too much time.
Right.
From one countertop or even in the security part of the prison tier. And occasionally, if a deputy, well, in this case, a corrections officer, gets a bit aggravated too much with the day's behavior of these inmates, They decides to look at them and fold his arms and delay the disbursement of their commissary and say, well, I see ice cream that might be melting soon,
Right.
You get them in line, but then there's other times in which a corrections officer might want to just be mean and just actually watch the ice cream melt.
That's messed up.
Yeah, it is, because I mean, okay, some people can just say what they want and think that what they want about how some of these characters got into jail, but that's really immaterial. If you're going to offer to sell ice cream to inmates from their commissary fund, then
it should be actually ice cream and not soup.
That is correct. Otherwise, don't offer ice cream to the commissary. And that kind of borders upon cruel and unusual punishment.
Well, even if it's not, at the very least, to me, it's very rude. It's bad manners.
Yeah, it really is. It kind of ties into you got the 3 C's: care, custody, control. It's part of the care part.
Yes, and as we expressed in last week's episode, even though these are not so nice people in Angola prison, they're still human beings.
Yes, and our Constitution forbids mistreatment. Cruel and unusual punishment means you're being abused in such a way that is not part of your prison sentence. Okay. Now, some people are going to feel abused if they're locked up behind, behind a cell door.
Right.
Okay. But of course, that's part of the prison sentence. You see.
Right.
But mistreatment is not supposed to be part of a prison sentence. And so let's get back to some of this mistreatment that takes place through peer pressure and institutional pressure to participate in a prison rodeo.
Well, the most dangerous event is called Guts and Glory. Would you like to guess what this involves?
Oh my God, that's are we is this getting worse? Is this getting worse than the inmate poker?
Yes.
Okay, let's hear it.
Inmates try to pluck a poker chip from between the horns of a charging bull for a chance at the grand prize of $500.
The grand prize of $500.
Yes, that is the grand prize.
Wow.
Most of the events and prizes, most of the prizes for the events given out are belt buckles. So there's really only 2 ways to win any money. That's the Convict Poker and the Guts and Glory. Everything else is belt buckles.
That is insane. That sounds worse than the inmate poker, because that's one-on-one.
It is one-on-one.
So your chances of being the one who gets gored have increased drastically.
Yes,
by 75%, I would say.
And I'm going to tell you this too, that there's also a really good chance that you could get trampled by this animal.
And gored, both.
Both,
yes.
Yeah. And I've seen some footage of. So for a period of time in my life, I was very much into horses, but I think you know this, Brian. And so for some reason, and this was back when we didn't have as much variety in television options as we have today, of course. But on occasion, I would watch rodeos on TV. And some of the footage of that I've seen of what can happen is really terrifying. I've seen footage of a bull actually pick up somebody by its horns and ram it against the fence, and just really scary stuff. But here's the thing, though. Those people are professionals. There's rodeo clowns, professional bull riders who do actually train, by the way. You don't just wake up one day and say, I'm going to get on this bull.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't work that way, okay? They train long and hard, and they actually do have a chance to make a pretty decent living, at least for a little while. I guess till you get, too many bumps and bruises and broken bones before you decide you don't want to go on anymore. But that's that's the actual part, a real rodeo. Okay, now imagine if you're somebody who has not had any training, and perhaps your only exposure to this is this annual rodeo.
And I'm going to add that death row inmates are allowed to participate in a rodeo. So they won't give them air conditioning, but they'll give them belt buckles and a chance of $500.
Oh, all right. $500 for some ice cream that might be melted by the time it gets to you.
Because those death row inmates are not really going anywhere. They are there.
Yeah, I can certainly understand their elective participation in this.
Well,
now, basically, it's like, okay, yes, they have training for actual professional rodeos. There are schools set up for this.
Exactly.
In rural areas where they do conduct rodeos, so you can literally go to school to become a rodeo clown. Anyone can enroll in the school to be a rodeo clown,
but you get paid pretty good, I think, to be a professional rodeo clown. Like,
right.
That's a very dangerous job. I just want to keep pointing that out. I just want to point out how dangerous these animals are. And I'm saying this because, I know that we may have some listeners who do live in rural areas, but we probably also have a lot of city listeners. And, and I say this because as a person who lives in a city, I don't have regular exposure to animals this large. But I do know that they're very dangerous.
Yes. And you see, it's the thing. Now, here's a fundamental difference, okay? Okay, so, John Smith decides to become that he's thinking he might want to be a rodeo clown. He's watched rodeos since he was a child, and he's really admired these guys. So part of his decision process, of course, just like anyone else who goes to a school for training, of course, the school and the training is part of your decision process on whether or not this vocation is for you. Okay?
Right.
So, John Smith, the law-abiding citizen who stayed out of trouble, it's 100% his decision.
Right.
On whether or not he's going to continue on this course and even get the training and get prepared to get the job if he's able to get it or if he even wants it. But now, let's say John Smith is thinking about this, training as a rodeo clown, and he gets into a lot of trouble and ends up going to Angola.
Mm-hmm.
You see. Now, at this point, of course, part of this is subjective. Of course. It's not entirely up to John Smith at this point as to whether or not he gets to participate. He gets to become a rodeo clown, and he's deprived of the training for it. And what I mean by not entirely up to him is because the institution of Angola, this is called institutional pressure, of course.
Right.
Provides incentives, proverbial carrot on the stick, and of course there's pressure. There's pressure applied to agree to this kind of stuff. Of course, they'll tell the public, oh, this is all voluntary. Well, if you're locked up behind bars,
and
hold on, and an institution wants to find X number of performers for this deadly dog and pony show, then it's not really entirely up to you now, is it?
And also, I just want to point out that if you're on death row, I think you get like an hour outside of your cell each day, right?
I believe that's the basic for the state of Louisiana. That is the minimum requirement is 1 hour out of the cell
every 24 hours.
Every 24 hours. Yes.
Okay, so think about this. Even when we were in lockdown, I was sitting outside a lot. Remember?
Yes.
So I was sitting outside a lot and at least I could be outside, like right on my porch of the house, like socially distancing, and it was especially when the weather was nice. It was just nice to just be able to sit outside. You don't have the choice as a death row inmate. You can't just go outside, and at any time you want to.
And in some institutions, the 1 hour out of the cell per day is quite literally just that.
Yeah, and
1 hour out of the cell, and it's now we can sit down on these tables that are in between, both sides of this prison tier.
Mm-hmm.
See, that's how Like, for example, just one example of this, like when I worked in juvenile for the Orleans Parish Criminal Sheriff's Office, the 1 hour out of this out of cells for, although this really, in juvenile, this applied to the lockdown tier on the third floor. You see? So, just one little example here. Juvenile A is on the left side, is locked up on the left side. Juvenile B is on the right side, and they're on separate sides. Why? Because they got into a fight with each other. So, 1 hour out of the cells. Okay, so the left side cells are all opened. They can walk around. They can sit on the benches and continue to watch the same TV screen that was on. They could see through the bars. Okay. And vice versa, when it's time for them to get back in their cells, and the right side is open simultaneously. You see, so for some prison tiers, that's all the 1 hour out the cell is, which doesn't make that much a difference.
Ripley, stop it, silly dog. She's going around. Anyway, yeah, so 1 hour a day out. So if you're only out for that amount of time on a regular basis, you might gladly volunteer for this because you get to be outside
for an extended period of time. Yeah. And of course it's going to feel good. Okay. Right. Now, my experience with this was when I was active duty in the Marine Corps. Okay. Whereas the restrictions you're under, the constitutional freedoms that you have willingly surrendered to serve the country, part of the sacrifices that you volunteered to make, and of course volunteered to make not being locked up in an institution, mind you, okay?
Right.
While you're a regular civilian is free. So when you get cut loose for a weekend, which is just under 72 hours, okay, for the first time after your boot camp and your MOS school, whereas sometimes you go straight from boot camp to your MOS school.
Tell everybody what MOS means in case you
military occupational specialty. In other words, your job. Okay.
Right.
The U.S. Navy calls it a rate, RATE.
Okay.
For example, so then you all of a sudden you have this, you have
freedom.
You have a bit more freedom, and you feel really, really good. Okay. And you're this. You
probably head for the nearest bar.
Well, yeah. So that's one of the stops. Yeah. Movie theater. Yeah, you're gonna run to a movie theater for sure. I know I did.
What did you go see?
Well, let's see. I remember one after boot camp. It was during part of infantry school. One weekend off, I went to see. It was the James Bond movie License to Kill. Which, being a young Marine, I thought I had one of those licenses, of course. I was another weekend off. I saw Predator 2.
Good movie.
And, of course, it's amazing. It's like you're under restriction and like you have this time off and all of a sudden, and everything's much more fun. Everything's much more enjoyable. So when these inmates get all this fresh air.
I mean, that's probably how I felt when I was 18 and I was finally an adult and I didn't have a curfew and I could be out till all hours of the night. That's probably because I'm not serving in the military and I've not been in prison. So I'm comparing that to the freedom that I felt when I was young and 18 and could finally, I didn't have any rules for my parents,
Yeah, oh yeah, and that's kind of true of military personnel who are on liberty or on leave.
Mm-hmm.
Which case, the weekend off, that's called liberty.
Right.
All of a sudden, okay, you for about 72 hours, you don't have to dress in a uniform.
Right.
Okay, so that feels good. But you mentioned how you mentioned rules. Well, for that time when you get away from the base, Well, you're not really. There's a lot of rules you don't have to follow.
I mean, although to be clear, you still do have to follow the laws of wherever you are, though.
Right. You have to follow the laws of the municipal and the state laws, and you have to follow the Uniform Code of Military Justice, the UCMJ,
right,
for conduct.
But you still have more freedom than the average inmate does in Angola.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
And I would even venture to say if you're on a military base, you have less restrictions on what you can and cannot do in general.
Yeah, as far as like people serving in the military, the closest thing, as far as like military service, the closest thing to prison, I would say, is being on a submarine or a ship.
Okay.
Okay, you see.
But even those people get rotated out. I mean, I think what the point we're really trying to make is that it just sucks to be on death row. And it sucks that they look at this potentially dangerous event as, a freedom. A freedom. I might get killed, but a freedom.
Yeah, that's where a good bit of the institutional pressure comes in.
Yes.
These little incentives that are this prize, this little relatively this chump change that's called a prize, and these incentives and institutional pressure because they've had you locked up.
Right. And I couldn't find any negative publicity from participants or Angola staff about the rodeo. No surprise there.
Yes, because there's in an institution like that behind closed doors where the public generally doesn't really get to see what happens there. There's serious hell to pay, obviously, for anyone speaking out about some of the abuses that take place or the tragedies that take place during preparation for this and during an event like this.
Right. Now there are plenty of there is plenty of outrage on the internet about this, though. Like when I was looking up things about the prison rodeo, yes, if you want to go find, I'm sorry, I don't remember which Reddit board it was exactly, but there was a Reddit board devoted to outrage about this. Which I am glad that there are people who, at least on the internet, who are angry about this. This is something to be angry about. This is not something frivolous, like I don't know, your childhood was ruined by Kathleen Kennedy or something. Like this is something to actually be outraged over.
Yes, most definitely. Now I take it Angola's the only prison institution in the country that has a rodeo.
It is the remaining one, actually. Mississippi and Georgia used to have their own, but Louisiana is the only one that still does it.
I see. So the reforms took place, and
yes,
yeah. Wow. So I mean, do you know did those states actually ban this, or were there so many restrictions put in place to where the institution decided it was just no longer worth it?
I didn't look into it that closely, but I would not be surprised if it was reforms and they decided that's too much trouble.
Yeah, it's interesting how Georgia and Mississippi seem to wake up before Louisiana does.
Well, Georgia seems to be just a wee bit more progressive. I think Georgia seems to be the most progressive state in the southern region. That's what it feels like to me.
But Mississippi does come as somewhat of a surprise there.
Well, Mississippi's also had a wee bit of progress, and I say this because change and progress come very slow to the South in general, right? You have Tennessee, you have the Carolinas, Virginia, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, Alabama,
Arkansas.
Yeah, Arkansas. And then I think Texas is considered more west, or at least, right? Yeah, considered more west.
Yeah.
So we don't really count Texas.
Just to touch on Texas a little bit with like Southern history, Texas did not secede from the Union, and but there were Texans who who did join the one part of the Confederate Army or another.
Right, right.
And there was recruiting that took place in Texas. Like I remember when it was this tourist attraction called Washington on the Brazos, which was one of the earlier Brazos was like one of the early Texas capitals.
Right.
And I saw some of the propaganda recruiting material from the Confederacy. They were saying such things as Northern mercenaries. They called the Union Army a bunch of mercenaries, or marching down to and calling for volunteers and all that stuff. But let's go ahead and move on.
Well, allegedly, the money raised by the rodeo benefits the inmates by funding prison programs, which, okay, maybe it's partially true, but I don't think it's entirely true. And I also think that it's crap that such an event has to be held to even raise money for prison programs when that money should be coming from the state. But of course, as we touched upon in the first episode about Angola prison, a lot of that money gets mysteriously disappeared.
Oh, what a surprise that is in the state of Louisiana.
It is not a surprise. And
of course it is.
And I also do want to make clear to anybody who's listening, I dearly love New Orleans. I love the city I live in. But sometimes the state of Louisiana really makes it... sometimes I'll admit it, I'm ashamed of my state. I am ashamed that they still do this.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and we both love the state of Louisiana, but it doesn't mean we love everything about our state, and that's one of the things that we don't love.
Well, New Orleans is the best thing about Louisiana.
Yes, I have to agree, and for a variety of reasons, just to touch upon, fiscal reasons. Much of the state sales tax,
right,
is generated in New Orleans because of spending on food and alcohol.
Well, not just food and alcohol, but events too. When you have people say come in for Essence Fest or Mardi Gras, that's huge.
Yeah,
food. Lots of people.
Lots of food and alcohol sales.
Yeah, lots of everything.
Which generates state sales tax.
Yes.
The very judgmental, Bible thumping types of people who exist in northern Louisiana are constantly talking about how much of a sin city New Orleans is, everything. But their representatives and their state senators gladly accept, and of course they do too, the so-called sin money.
Right. Oh, yeah.
That comes,
Oh, yes, I know. You just crack open okay, well, not almost any, but a lot of posts on Facebook, I will just say that, of course, I stay out of it because you're not going to change people's minds on who New Orleans is the worst place on earth. But, I'm happy to live here.
Yeah, so am I. So anyway, it should come as no surprise that an institution like Angola decides to, turn some of their inmates into modern-day gladiators to raise money that they should have received from the state in the first place. And there's plenty of corrections money.
Oh, there's a lot.
In the state of Louisiana, as far as on the parish level, the sheriff of every parish makes sure of that they get plenty of money for their jails.
Of course.
Whereas, of course, this is a state institution. A sheriff doesn't run Angola, but just the same has to be funded.
Well,
and this is not exactly a benevolent way to fundraise, and we see abuses of the participants in this rodeo. Just the same as corrections officers are not supposed to get inmates to fight each other for incentives and place bets on them.
Right.
Okay. This seems to be a formalized legal gladiatorial combat here.
Yes. And regarding abuses of power, there have been a handful of wardens that have ran the prison throughout the years who have been especially corrupt. But there is one warden who seems to be the least worst. And I'm going to tell you, well, we touched upon him last week, Ross Magio. He was, in the prison like in the early 80s. And he apparently did make it a little bit better during his tenure. Now, 2 years before his retirement, he and his mother, Doris, were kidnapped by 2 inmates. Did you know about this?
No.
So the inmates held him and his mother at knife point and ordered them into Warden Magio's pickup truck and told them to drive toward Angola's front gates. As they neared the gates, Warden Magio increased the speed of the truck and crashed it into an iron post. While the 2 inmates were stunned, Magio jumped out the truck, grabbed a pistol from a guard stationed at the front gates, and shot several times. 1 inmate died at the scene, the other one was injured and is now serving life in prison, and Ross and his mother both survived.
Wow.
Hardcore.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, the person who came after Magio was not so great. Hilton Butler. During his tenure, suicides, escapes, and assaults increased. They were not properly searching inmates for contraband, or visitors who were coming in were also not properly searched. This prompted the United States District Judge Frank Pelosa to appoint Ross Magio to head an investigation into Angola. So he didn't really he didn't really quit Magio, okay? So first he was the warden, he improved things, and then when he left, it got so bad there was a noticeable shift, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So this is why he was appointed to investigate Hilton Butler.
That makes sense because, of course, he's well aware of the kind of things that go on and well aware of what can go wrong, and probably already had several ideas in his head about what led to things going out of control.
Right. Now, Magio's investigation uncovered a huge cockfighting ring that was taking place on the prison grounds.
Now, we're talking as in roosters fighting each other.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, roosters.
Right. Which is, cockfighting is illegal.
I don't think it was illegal at this time, but the fact that he was using prison facilities to raise and sell the roosters and even held events on prison grounds, that was definitely not legal.
Yes, against
protocol
and institutional
rules
institutional
and protocol. Rules, yes.
I mean, maybe while they're at it, maybe they should have just held a prison gun show. And have the inmates work the tables and do the background checks. And well, back then they probably didn't have background checks. It was just the forms, A prison gun shop too, but only for people visiting the prison,
Right.
And
yeah.
Have it, and see if ATF doesn't mind inmates, working the prison gun shop and the prison gun show.
That would be a great idea.
Yes, and it's, of course, we know it wouldn't be
we're being sarcastic.
It wouldn't be a violation of federal law at all for convicted felons to sell guns, even if it is through using a federal firearms license, at a prison gun shop, which of course doesn't exist. But then again, with all the seemingly outlandish, when you compare Angola to other institutions, the various things that have gone on and activities conducted are just outlandish by comparison. So, here I am coming up with my own ideas for things Angola can try to do that aren't going to be legal or ethical or authorized under state law that governs corrections facilities.
But my lord, is that legal?
I'll make it legal.
There you go. That's sort of what you could say about some of the wardens, right?
Yes.
I'll make it legal. Anyway, as touched on earlier, Butler failed to maintain searches of employees and visitors to the prison, which resulted in a serious breakdown of security. Drug and other contraband problems in the prison were well known to him, and the then then Secretary of the Department of Public Safety and Corrections, Bruce Lynn, told all of the wardens to refrain from any personal business activity while the investigation was happening. But Butler ignored that order, and he continued to run his cockfighting ring up until the moment he resigned. In the wake of that investigation, several hundred fighting roosters were removed from the grounds. And this is when Butler resigned. And that was more or less the end of his story with Angola. Now, Burl Kane, the heartless bastard who had a golf course built, there's a lot of things that I uncovered about him through a few searches, okay? And he is going to get his own episode someday. Because out of all of his underbelly dealing and everything, it was a side deal that wasn't even necessarily illegal that wound up ending his tenure in Angola. He invested more than $2 million into a real estate venture, which was all above board. However, he took on relatives and friends of inmates as partners, which is a violation of corrections rules.
Yes, that's very unethical and corrupt.
Extremely so.
And that's extremely unusual. That's the kind of thing that you would think would make national news when it's discovered, because quite frankly that's, as I said, that's very unusual for prison institutions. That wouldn't fly for very long if it even was concocted in, let's say, at Orleans Parish Prison.
Mm-hmm.
That probably wouldn't even be tried on the parish level. It just seems that Angola is so far from civilization.
It very much is.
That's one of the reasons why all of this extracurricular activity has been enabled.
Right. And Brian, it may not surprise you to learn that Burl Kane's children had been steadily promoted within the department's hierarchy without raising any questions of nepotism. Now, his oldest son, Nate, used to be the head warden at a prison in, is it pronounced Avols Parish? It's not Ayvols. I think it's Avols or Avolis.
Avo?
Maybe.
I think it could be Avo in French.
Okay, well, that's where he was warden for a period of time until, you'll never guess what happened, Brian. He and his ex-wife, Tanya, had spent as much as $150,000 of prison money for personal purchases such as flat-screen TVs, Yeti coolers, gun parts, toilet paper, and Christmas decorations, as well as construction supplies used to build a new home on prison property. They shielded the fraudulent transactions from state oversight, but they were caught and they both spent time in federal prison.
Understandably so.
Yes.
Because the only way that you can legally enrich yourself from employment with a correctional institution is through your salary.
Right.
That's it.
Mm-hmm. And it was a very nice salary. He was getting paid at least 6 figures a year to be a warden.
Yes, so that makes him even more of a crook in our eyes, because the state of Louisiana was providing him with more than he needed for him and his wife to have a comfortable life. Much more. Most people don't make 5-figure salaries.
Right. Well, they were making 6, but you're right. A lot of people don't even make 5.
Yeah, or 6. I meant to say 6.
But you weren't wrong either. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the Canes will get their own podcast episode someday because, well, they committed crimes and we are a true crime podcast.
That's right.
So, in fact, I wanted to let everybody know that when we're finished with this current batch of Angola episodes, we will be returning to the topic again in the future because there's too much information to be covered even in this month. And this all needs to be discussed.
Yes, very much so. Because no prison institution should be allowed to...
You're not above the law.
Right, to be above the law, to just simply hide everything that's going on. Because if you can hide just about everything that's going on, then of course you're going to breed corruption.
Right.
Because there's no
oversight.
Right.
There's no order. There's nothing.
There's no... Well, visibility is not necessarily the word.
Transparency?
Transparency, yes. Angola exists largely without transparency.
Exactly.
For the most part. Only during it appears only during the 21st century, for the most part, has much of this come out.
Well, we need to keep talking about it until something's actually done. So... we're going to keep talking about it.
Yes, because it needs to function under the rules of any other corrections institution.
Yes.
In the state.
And I'm going to end this episode with an update on the lawsuit that was mentioned on our first episode, which was about capital punishment. So, federal judge Shelley Dick has dismissed a nearly decade-old lawsuit against executions in Louisiana, saying that there's nothing to challenge because the state can only get the required drugs as medicines. You may recall that state officials testified that manufacturers said that they cut off medical supplies if drugs were used to kill inmates. The lawsuit was initially brought forward by inmate Jesse Hoffman and 10 other inmates. They wanted to know how they would be killed, and the state refused to tell them. The drug that seems to be really swirling around in this lawsuit is a drug called, I hope I say this right, Midazolam. Midazolam. It is a sedative that is used in surgeries and is also used in the 3-drug protocol that is currently used in Louisiana executions. But because the drug manufacturing companies have stated they will no longer sell drugs to Louisiana if their drugs are used in executions, well, Louisiana has to figure out something else. So it looks like, at least for the moment, the inmates are getting another lease.
Yeah, but no surprise.
It's no surprise, but it does deserve an update.
Right, yeah. Above and beyond the appeals process that extends this. Extends time on death row. Louisiana does need to find a different method of execution because this has become just too murky of a swamp, no pun intended, to navigate. It's making it more costly, and it's just simply needlessly extending out the time it takes to execute the sentence. And it seems to be its own form of cruelty.
It is.
From the needle stick all the way to this slow death that's actually an overdose of certain drug.
Right.
And it's funny how the traditional state prison firing squad, which still exists in some states.
I think, is that Utah that still has it?
Utah is one, yeah. The way it's carried out, it's actually quite humane, even though from the outside it appears to be brutal. It really isn't.
It's very fast.
It's the fastest execution possible.
Right.
Yeah. Because it's several 30-06.
Well, this is a firing squad.
Yes, a firing squad of police marksmen who have the highest qualifications on the rifle range. Okay? And they're using these deer rifles. I guess you can call them deer rifles because, 30-06 is a traditional deer hunting round that originated as a military round, actually. It's like the The good old M1 Garand service rifles in World War II were used the 30-06 rounds. But, they're deer hunting rounds. So 5 or 6 of them hits the human heart simultaneously. It's over before you know it, and you actually don't even feel it. So it's a very quick and it's a very humane death. And if we could somehow get it through that clown car of idiots that we call Louisiana State Legislature,
like Jeff Landry.
Yeah, although Jeff Landry's the Attorney General,
he's still part of the clown car of idiots, and
so that's true. That's true.
As we've stated before, he is not in front of the podcast. We do not like him.
No, he is one of those attorney generals who abuses his position by using lawsuits to campaign for himself and raise campaign funds, which this is all legal, but we don't consider this to be ethical.
Right, or at the very least, it is distasteful.
Yeah.
So you can perhaps, Brian, because I tell you what, though, when I read the results of this lawsuit and essentially saying that Louisiana is going to have to find another way to perform their executions, I knew it was going to make Jeff Landry mad, and I laughed.
Yeah.
So there is that, at least. Now, do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
I think we've laid it out so far. We've laid it out pretty good.
Yes, we have. It's
just how unethical
all this
is, and corrupt, and the reasons that Angola just breeds all of this. And it's interesting how when you're young and you go on a field trip to Angola, you're thinking about just how wonderful an institution this is, and the reason why is because the tour of Angola you're getting is similar to, say, let's say, there's some people who get to have tours of parts of North Korea.
Right.
And they show you what they want you to see. Okay?
Like in the movie The Interview?
Like in the movie The Interview. Precisely right. That was one of the parts of the interview that was just dead on correct.
Well, like the fake grocery stores and stuff?
The fake grocery stores, yes. So, although in Angola, nothing's really fake, it's just that you're on this guided tour and you only get to see what they want you to see.
Well,
and they're not going to. It's not really transparent.
Yeah, that's it. It's not really transparent. Yes.
You see what they want you to see, and it's going to be the most flattering parts of the institution. And the only inmates you have contact with are prison trustees who value their trustee status and the privileges they have. So they're going to smile and they're going to act like life is wonderful.
Right. Yes.
In there. Okay. So you get this tour of Angola, and what you see is, you see a third world propaganda act taking place in front of you. In that fashion, the field trip to Angola is, while it is eye-opening in some aspects, okay, because, you have prison trustees who are lifers, and, they open up to you in some ways, but only in ways that the institution approves of.
Right.
Like, like when they tell you that they found God in prison, they read the Bible in prison, and they grew past the monster that they were when they entered the institution. Okay. And that's really good stuff. And it's that in itself, it's wonderful, but that's just a person, an inmate sharing their experiences with you. But along with that, they're not about to share with you
what they've actually done.
Right. Or well, some of them will,
Yeah, maybe
some of them will, yes. But what they're not going to do, they're not going to tell you about times they may have been brutally beaten by a prison guard.
Yes, and in fact, I did want to add that a lot of my information actually came from archived New York Times articles.
Investigative journalism,
not not our local Times-Picayune or Advocate or anything like that. No, a lot of this came from archived articles. Okay, so it feels like that even a lot of the corruption that takes place or has taken place is not even really that widely known. Like that when we talked about Lead Belly last week and the Heel String Gang, some of that came from a book, and some of that came from archived articles. Okay.
Yeah. So I mean,
So it feels like a lot of this is trying to be hidden.
Oh yes.
Okay.
And I mean, another thought of mine is that it should come as no surprise to anyone that a corrupt institution that historically has had, no transparency, breeds corruption and breeds crime on the part of state officials. So that's something else that prison institution is not supposed to do. It's not supposed to turn state officials or parish officials into criminals.
But it does.
Yeah.
And it's done this consistently in Louisiana. We've seen this in our time as residents, and we're both natives. So this is our lifetimes of watching this go down with different sheriffs, different politicians, and not just local. I mean, we're talking about state officials as well have gotten in trouble. I mean, it's a never-ending cycle of corruption.
Yeah. Now keep in mind, a state corrections officer is legally a state official.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Now let me ask you this: is like a bailiff who is considered an officer of the court? Are they also considered a corrections official?
Now hold on a minute here. A bailiff's not an officer of the court.
Oh, why did they? Okay.
That's a lawyer.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. Prosecutors and defense attorneys are both officers of the court.
Okay.
Okay. You see, no, a bailiff. It depends. If it's a state court, then it could be a state employee. But if a bailiff is a sheriff's deputy, then that's a parish
position.
A parish position.
Right. Okay.
So yes, those legally those are state officials, which means if one of them is failing to perform their duties in a manner that the state of Louisiana will consider to be criminal, then that's malfeasance in office for someone who is in corrections or law enforcement. But in Louisiana, interestingly enough, a state official or parish official who commits a crime, they can be charged with malfeasance in office in addition to the crime they committed. We
are out of time today. But don't worry, because this subject will come up again and again. Again and again and again, because we live in a never-ending cycle of corruption. Right, Brian?
Oh, yes. Corruption in Louisiana is a gift that keeps on giving.
You're so correct about that. In fact, you get a gold star for this podcast because of how correct you are.
Thank you.
All right, listeners. Next week, we're going to talk about tales of prisoners who managed to break out of the hard walls of Angola and ultimately what happened to them. So, till next time, be safe, be kind, and don't park next to vans.
And remember, if it's dark, it's dangerous, and it does not feel safe, don't even be there in the first place. And never forget that if you are talking to the police, any member of law enforcement, not as a witness or not as a victim of a crime, in a formal manner, of course, lawyer up.